65 million years ago, when the galaxy was young and the warp was calm, an ancient civilization reached heights of power that make even the emperor of mankind look like a primitive warlord. They reshaped reality itself, created entire species as weapons of war, and fought conflicts that literally tore holes in the fabric of existence. They were the Old Ones, the first masters of the galaxy, the original wielders of psychic power, and quite possibly the most influential beings in the history of Warhammer 40,000. But here's the terrifying truth. We killed them. Not humans. We weren't even a glimmer in evolution's eye yet. The Necrons and their star god masters, the C'tan, waged a war so brutal and complete that it didn't just destroy the Old One's civilization, it transformed the very nature of reality, created the horrors that stalk the warp today, and set in motion every major conflict that would follow for the next 65 million years. Welcome back to the LORELORD, where today we're diving into the deepest mysteries of Warhammer 40,000 lore. This is the story of beings so ancient and powerful that their death screams echo through the warp to this day, whose weapons still fight their wars long after their creators have passed into legend, and whose legacy shapes every aspect of the galaxy we know. To understand the Old Ones, we must first grasp the sheer scope of their achievements. These weren't just another ancient alien race. They were reality engineers, beings who understood the fundamental forces of the universe so completely that they could reshape them at will. The Old Ones were among the first species to achieve sentience in the Milky Way. While other races were still crawling out of primordial oceans, the Old Ones had already mastered psychic powers, developed faster-than-light travel, and begun their expansion across the galaxy. But what set them apart wasn't just their technological advancement. It was their fundamental understanding of the relationship between the material universe and the immaterial realm we now call the Warp. Codex Necrons, 9th edition, describes their nature. The Old Ones were creatures of such psychic potency that reality itself bent to their will. They commanded the powers of creation and destruction with the casual ease that lesser beings might lift a stone or kindle fire. But the Old Ones weren't just powerful, they were shapers, gardeners on a galactic scale. They didn't simply conquer worlds, they transformed them, creating ecosystems perfectly suited to their needs and the needs of the species they created to serve them. They understood life itself as a form of technology, something to be improved, modified, and weaponized when necessary. Most crucially, the Old Ones understood the warp not as a realm of chaos and horror, but as a tool. During their era, the Imperium was relatively calm, a reflection of a galaxy dominated by species that were either psychically gifted or created by those who were. The emotional turbulence that would later give birth to the Chaos Gods was largely absent because the Old Ones' influence created a kind of psychic stability across the galaxy. Perhaps the most staggering aspect of Old One civilization was their mastery of biological engineering. Where later races would build machines and construct fortifications, the Old Ones grew their tools, bred their weapons, and cultivated their servants from the raw materials of life itself. The evidence of their creative genius is scattered across the galaxy, hidden in the genetic code of species that still exist today. The Eldar, with their natural psychic abilities and extended lifespans, bear the clear hallmarks of Old One's engineering. The Orcs, seemingly crude, but possessing an instinctive understanding of technology that borders on the supernatural, represent perhaps the Old One's most successful military creation. Even humans show signs of Old One's influence, though the exact nature of that influence remains hotly debated among Imperial scholars. Codex Eldar, 4th edition, hints at this legacy. The Eldar know themselves to be the children of gods long dead, inheritors of powers and purposes they no longer fully comprehend. In their genetic memory lies the echo of minds that could reshape reality with a thought. The Jokero, those orange-furred simian creatures capable of creating impossibly advanced technology, represent another example of Old One's biological engineering. Their ability to instinctively understand and improve any technology they encounter suggests they were designed as living tool makers, biological factories capable of adapting to any technological challenge. But perhaps the most impressive example of Old One's bioengineering is the Slann, beings of such psychic power that they could communicate across galactic distances, manipulate the orbits of planets, and channel energies that could crack continents. The Slann weren't just servants, they were living weapons of mass destruction, each one capable of single-handedly defending entire star systems. The process by which the Old Ones created these species involved more than simple genetic manipulation. They worked with what we might call soul crafting, designing not just the physical forms of their creations, but their spiritual and psychic natures as well. This explains why so many Old Ones created species possess innate psychic abilities, and why their genetic patterns show such resistance to mutation and degradation over millions of years. The Old Ones' dominance might have continued indefinitely, if not for the emergence of their greatest enemies, the Necrontyr. These beings represented everything the Old Ones were not. Short-lived where the Old Ones were eternal, technologically oriented where the Old Ones were biologically focused, and perhaps most importantly, almost completely unable to access psychic powers. The Necrontyr civilization was defined by tragedy. Their home world orbited a star that bombarded them with lethal radiation, giving them incredibly short lifespans and filling their culture with bitterness and envy toward longer-lived species. When they achieved spaceflight and encountered the Old Ones, this bitterness crystallized into active hatred. Here were beings who lived for thousands of years, who commanded powers that seemed godlike, who had reshaped the galaxy according to their whims, and they refused to share the secret of longevity with a species that desperately needed it. The Old One's rejection of Necrontyr, pleas for aid, would prove to be one of the most catastrophic decisions in galactic history. Codex Necrons describes this fateful encounter. The Necrontyr came before the Old Ones as supplicants, begging for the gift of extended life. But the Old Ones, in their ancient wisdom, or perhaps their ancient arrogance, refused to share their secrets with a race they deemed unworthy. This rejection set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately destroy both civilizations. The Necrontyr, driven by desperation and hatred, began developing technologies specifically designed to counter the Old Ones' advantages. Unable to match their enemies' mastery of life, they turned to mastery of death. Unable to rival their psychic powers, they developed weapons that could disrupt and nullify such abilities. But their greatest breakthrough, and their greatest mistake, was making contact with beings that existed within stars themselves, entities of living metal and cosmic hunger that would become known as the C'tan, the Star Gods. The conflict that erupted between the Old Ones and the Necrontyr, later called the War in Heaven, wasn't just another galactic conflict. It was a battle between fundamentally incompatible visions of what the universe should be. On one side stood the Old Ones and their creations, representing organic life, psychic power, and the interconnectedness of material and immaterial reality. On the other side stood the Necrons, as the Necrontyr had become after their alliance with the C'tan, representing mechanical perfection, the rejection of the soul, and the primacy of physical law over spiritual reality. The war lasted for millions of years and devastated the galaxy on a scale that's almost impossible to comprehend. Entire star systems were destroyed, not just their planets, but their suns themselves, consumed by the C'tan or transformed into weapons by Old One's technology. Whole regions of space were rendered uninhabitable by weapons that poisoned reality itself. The Old Ones fought back with everything they had, creating new species specifically designed as weapons against the Necron threat. The Eldar were crafted to be psychic warriors, capable of channeling the full power of the warp. The Orcs were designed as an endless, self-sustaining army that could fight forever, without need for supply lines or reinforcement. Countless other species were brought into existence for the sole purpose of fighting this war. But perhaps most significantly, the war in heaven changed the nature of the warp itself. The massive loss of life, the psychic trauma of entire species being exterminated, the raw emotion of fear, hatred, and desperation on a galactic scale, all of this poured into the Imperium, transforming it from a relatively calm realm into the roiling sea of chaos we know today. The Horus Heresy Book. 1. Betrayal describes the scale of this conflict. The war in heaven was fought not just across the galaxy, but through the very fabric of reality itself. Battles raged in dimensions that have no names, using weapons that unmade the targets they struck from existence itself. The turning point came when the Old Ones began to lose control of their own creations. The psychic species they had crafted to fight the Necrons became increasingly unstable as the warp grew more turbulent. The Eldar, designed to channel vast psychic energies, began experiencing the first stirrings of what would become their species-wide addiction to sensation and violence. The Orcs, created to be perfect warriors, began turning on each other when no Necron enemies were available. Most devastatingly, the Slann, the Old One's most powerful servants, began to fall into hibernation states, overwhelmed by the psychic chaos that their creator's own war had unleashed. Without their most capable lieutenants, the Old Ones found themselves unable to effectively coordinate their vast empire. As if the war itself wasn't catastrophic enough, the Old Ones' ultimate defeat came not from the Necrons, but from their own success in weaponizing the warp. The psychic turbulence caused by the war in heaven opened rifts between dimensions, allowing entities from the deepest parts of the Imperium to enter real space. These beings, known as the Enslavers, represented a threat that neither the Old Ones nor the Necrons were prepared to face. The Enslavers were parasitic entities that could take control of psychic beings, using their hosts as anchor points to manifest in the physical universe. Once manifested, they would continue to dominate more hosts, creating exponentially growing populations of mind-controlled slaves. For the psychically gifted Old Ones and their creations, the Enslavers represented an existential threat. Codex Tyranids, 3rd edition, describes the horror of the Enslaver plague. They came through cracks in reality itself, seizing control of minds that had been opened by psychic power. World after world fell silent as their populations became extensions of alien will, their thoughts no longer their own. The irony was bitter. The Old Ones' greatest strength, their mastery of psychic power, became their greatest weakness. The more powerful a psychic being, the more attractive a target they became for enslaver domination. The Slann, already weakened by the war's psychic turbulence, proved particularly vulnerable. One by one, the Old One's most powerful servants fell under alien control. The Old Ones themselves, as the most psychically potent beings in the galaxy, became prime targets. Unable to simply abandon their psychic abilities, which were as fundamental to their nature as breathing, they found themselves fighting a war on two fronts, against the advancing Necrons and against the enslavers who sought to dominate their very minds. Some Old Ones attempted to flee to pocket dimensions or distant galaxies. Others tried to transfer their consciousness into non-psychic beings or artificial constructs. A few may have attempted to hibernate in the same manner as their slan servants. But for most, there was no escape. The enslaver plague consumed them as it consumed their empire, leaving behind only the scattered remnants of the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known. The Necrons, despite their apparent victory over the Old Ones, found themselves facing an even worse threat from the enslavers. Unlike the psychically gifted species that were vulnerable to mental domination, the Necrons had traded away their souls during their transformation, making them immune to enslaver control. But this immunity came at a terrible price. They were now slaves to the C'tan, the star gods, who had promised them immortality, but delivered only eternal servitude. The Silent King, Zarek, the last ruler of the Necrontyre, recognized the trap his people had fallen into. The C'tan viewed the Necrons not as allies, but as tools, and once the Old Ones were defeated, there would be nothing to prevent the star gods from consuming all life in the galaxy, including whatever remained of Necron civilization. In a move that demonstrated strategic thinking on a level that rivals the Emperor himself, Zarek orchestrated the destruction of the C'tan. Using weapons designed specifically to shatter beings of living metal and cosmic energy, the Necrons turned on their gods, fragmenting them into countless shards that could be contained and controlled. But the damage was done. The galaxy lay in ruins, the Old Ones were extinct, and the enslavers had consumed much of what remained. The Silent King made the decision to enter the Great Sleep, ordering his people into hibernation until such time as the galaxy had recovered enough to support life again, and until the enslaver threat had passed. Codex Necrons, 5th edition, records the Silent King's final command. We have won everything and lost everything. The galaxy is ours, but it is an empty prize, a graveyard of possibilities. We shall sleep, and when we wake, perhaps we will remember what it was we thought we were fighting for. This decision effectively ended the war in heaven, but it also left the galaxy in a state of devastation that would take millions of years to recover from. The surviving Old Ones' creations, the Eldar, the Orcs, and countless other species, were left to fend for themselves in a universe suddenly devoid of their creator's guidance. The immediate aftermath of the war in heaven was catastrophic. Entire sectors of the galaxy were left lifeless, their stars dead or transformed into unrecognizable forms. The warp had been permanently changed from a realm of calm psychic energy into the turbulent, dangerous dimension we know today. The surviving species, created by the Old Ones, were scattered and traumatized, many having forgotten their original purposes. But the Old Ones' legacy went far deeper than the immediate destruction. They had fundamentally changed the nature of life in the galaxy, creating species whose genetic patterns would influence evolution for millions of years to come. More importantly, they had weaponized psychic power on a scale that established the foundations for everything that would follow. The Eldar inherited not just psychic abilities, but also an understanding of the warp's dangers that would shape their civilization for millions of years. Their mythology, their technology, even their method of reproduction reflected lessons learned during the war in heaven. the concept of infinity circuits, the use of wraithbone technology, the careful management of psychic power, all of these represented adaptations to a post-war galaxy where uncontrolled psychic activity could lead to catastrophe. The orcs represented a different kind of legacy. Created as the perfect soldiers, they retained an instinctive understanding of technology and warfare that allowed them to thrive in any environment. But they also carried within their genetic code a compulsion for violence that ensured they would never achieve the kind of stable civilization that might challenge their creator's supremacy. Perhaps most intriguingly, the Old Ones may have influenced human evolution in ways that weren't apparent until the Emperor began his work. The human psychic potential that he would later tap for the creation of the Primarchs and the Space Marines might represent dormant Old Ones engineering, genetic modifications made so long ago that they're now considered natural human traits. Xenology hints at this possibility. The human genome contains sequences that appear to have no evolutionary purpose, structures that seem almost engineered. Whether these represent natural mutations or the legacy of more ancient influences remains a subject of intense debate. This brings us to one of the most fascinating questions in Warhammer 40,000 lore. Did any Old Ones actually survive their civilization's collapse? The official position is that they're extinct, destroyed by the combination of Necron warfare, enslaver domination, and the collapse of galactic civilization. But the evidence suggests that this might not be the complete truth. The Harlequins, the enigmatic performers who serve the Eldar laughing god Segarash, possess knowledge that seems to predate the fall of the Eldar by millions of years. Their shadow seers tell stories of the war in heaven with a detail and accuracy that suggests first-hand knowledge. Some scholars theorize that the Harlequins might be more than just Eldar who serve an ancient god. They might be the descendants or servants of Old Ones who survived by allying themselves with one of the first Chaos gods. More intriguingly, there are scattered references throughout Imperial records to beings that don't fit the profile of any known Xenos species, but demonstrate capabilities that match what we know of Old Ones' powers. These encounters are rare and often classified, but they consistently describe entities capable of reshaping matter at the molecular level, communicating through pure psychic contact, and demonstrating knowledge of galactic history that spans millions of years. The Book of Mournful Night, an apocryphal Eldar text, contains a passage that's been translated as, "In the deepest places where time moves differently and space folds upon itself, the First Ones wait. Not dead, not alive, but something between, something beyond. They watch still, and sometimes, when the need is great enough, they remember what they once cared for." The C'tan themselves, in their fragmented state, have made references to Old One survivors in their rare communications with Necron overlords. These references are usually dismissed as attempts at psychological manipulation, but their consistency across multiple shards suggests they might contain elements of truth. Perhaps most compelling is the existence of the Slann themselves. While most entered hibernation during the war in heaven, not all of the temple cities were destroyed. Some Slann continue to awaken periodically, demonstrating powers that rival those of the Emperor himself. Whether these represent the last remnants of Old One's civilization or something else entirely remains unclear. The possibility that Old One survivors might still exist has spawned numerous theories among Imperial scholars, Eldar Farseers, and even Necron cryptechs. Each theory offers a different perspective on what such survivors might be doing and why they remain hidden. The Gardner theory suggests that surviving Old Ones continue their original mission of shepherding life throughout the galaxy, but on a much more subtle scale. Proponents point to instances of seemingly impossible evolutionary leaps, the emergence of psychic abilities in previously non-psychic species, and the mysterious appearance of beneficial mutations in populations facing extinction. If true, this would mean that Old One survivors are still actively influencing galactic evolution, working to repair the damage caused by the war in heaven. The Puppet Master theory proposes that Old One survivors have learned from their civilization's mistakes and now work entirely through intermediaries. Rather than ruling openly, they manipulate events from behind the scenes, guiding the actions of various species toward goals that serve their agenda. The unusual coordination between different Eldar factions, the Emperor's seemingly impossible knowledge of ancient history, even the timing of the Necron awakening, all could be explained by Old One's influence. The Transcendence theory suggests that the Old Ones didn't die, but rather evolved beyond physical existence, becoming beings of pure psychic energy that exist primarily in the warp. This would explain their apparent extinction, while also accounting for the ongoing influence of their technology and creations. If true, the Chaos Gods themselves might be corrupted or evolved versions of Old Ones who were transformed by the psychic trauma of the war in heaven. The Sleeper theory proposes that some Old Ones entered hibernation, similar to the Necrons but haven't yet awakened. Hidden in pocket dimensions, stasis fields, or locations outside normal space-time, they wait for conditions to improve enough to justify their return. The opening of the Great Rift and the increasing psychic awakening across the galaxy might be the triggers that will eventually bring them back. One of the most disturbing theories about Old One survival concerns the Tyranids. The Hive fleets demonstrate capabilities that seem to echo Old One's biotechnology. The ability to rapidly adapt life forms for specific purposes, the use of living ships and weapons, the creation of specialized organisms from genetic templates. Could the Tyranids represent the ultimate evolution of Old One's biotechnology? This theory suggests that some Old Ones, fleeing the destruction of their civilization, left the galaxy entirely and spent millions of years perfecting their biological engineering. The Tyranids would represent their return, not as the benevolent gardeners they once were, but as beings so changed by their experiences that they now view all other life as merely raw material for their experiments. Codex Tyranids, 8th edition, notes the unsettling sophistication of Hive fleet biotechnology. The organisms employed by the Tyranids demonstrate a level of biological engineering that surpasses anything achieved by current galactic civilizations. Their weapons are grown rather than manufactured. Their ships are born rather than built. Their very reproduction cycles serve purposes that span geological time frames. The shadow in the warp, the psychic nullification field that Tyranid fleets generate, could represent a refined version of anti-enslaver technology developed during the war in heaven. The hive mind's ability to coordinate trillions of organisms across galactic distances mirrors the Old One's original mastery of psychic communication. If this theory is correct, then humanity faces a threat that goes beyond simple alien invasion. The Tyranids would represent the return of the galaxy's original masters, beings whose understanding of life and evolution makes even the Emperor's genetic engineering look primitive by comparison. Perhaps no figure in current galactic history has demonstrated knowledge of the Old Ones comparable to the Emperor of mankind. His understanding of genetic engineering, his mastery of psychic powers, his apparent knowledge of events that predate human civilization by millions of years, all suggest that he possessed information about the Old Ones that he never shared. The Emperor's creation of the Primarchs involved techniques that seem to echo Old One's biotechnology. The use of warp-based enhancement, the integration of psychic abilities with physical enhancement, the creation of beings capable of inspiring absolute loyalty in their followers. These all represent approaches that match what we know of Old One's methods. Some scholars theorize that the Emperor discovered Old One's ruins or archives during his early travels across Terra. Others suggest that he might have encountered surviving Old Ones or their servants during humanity's expansion into space. A few even propose that the Emperor himself might be connected to the Old Ones in some way, perhaps a hybrid creation, a chosen inheritor of their knowledge, or even a surviving Old One who has taken human form. The Last Church provides a tantalizing hint about the Emperor's knowledge. I have walked in the ruins of civilizations older than human memory. I have seen the works of beings who reshaped reality with their will alone. I know what we can become, and I know what we must avoid. The Emperor's ultimate goal of freeing humanity from dependence on the warp through the Webway project mirrors Old One's technology in significant ways. The Eldar Webway was originally an Old One's creation, and the Emperor's attempt to create a human entrance suggests he understood its underlying principles. His failure to complete the project might represent not just a tactical defeat, but the loss of humanity's chance to inherit the Old One's greatest achievement. Speaking of the Webway, this ancient network of tunnels through dimensional space represents perhaps the most significant surviving Old One's technology. Built during the height of their civilization, the Webway allowed instantaneous travel across the galaxy without the risks associated with warp travel. More importantly, it provided a means of transportation that was completely isolated from the chaotic energies of the Imperium. The construction of the Webway required an understanding of dimensional physics that current civilizations can barely comprehend. The Old Ones didn't just build tunnels through space, they created an entirely separate layer of reality, a pocket dimension that exists between the material universe and the warp. This construction project alone would have required the coordinated efforts of their entire civilization over thousands of years. The Eldar inherited control of much of the Webway after the Old One's extinction, but they never fully understood its construction principles. They can maintain existing passages and even create small new ones, but the grand construction techniques that built the original network are beyond their current capabilities. Codex. Eldar describes the Webway's significance. The ancient pathways connect not just distant worlds, but distant possibilities. To walk the Webway is to move between realities, to step outside the normal flow of time and causation. It is the greatest gift the Old Ones left their children, and perhaps their greatest curse. The fact that the Webway continues to function after 65 million years speaks to the incredible sophistication of Old One's engineering. Despite the collapse of their civilization, despite the war in Heaven's devastation, despite millions of years of neglect and damage, the basic structure remains intact. This suggests construction techniques that go beyond simple technology to approach the manipulation of fundamental physical laws. Recent Imperial expeditions into damaged sections of the Webway have reported finding structures that appear to be growing, repairing themselves according to principles that no human technology can explain. Whether this represents automated Old One systems still functioning after all this time, or something else entirely, remains a mystery. Throughout the galaxy, archaeologists and explorers occasionally discover sites that predate any known civilization by millions of years. These Old Ones ruins are among the most dangerous archaeological sites in the galaxy, not because of traps or guardians, but because of the technology itself. Old Ones devices don't simply break down or become inert over time. Many continue to function according to purposes that their discoverers can't understand, creating effects that range from useful to catastrophic. Gravity generators that create localized time distortions, biological modification chambers that continue to operate without power sources, psychic amplifiers that can drive even non-psychic beings insane with the sheer volume of mental energy they channel. The Imperium has classified these sites as Omega-level threats, requiring immediate containment and, in most cases, complete planetary quarantine. The Adeptus Mechanicus has attempted to study Old Ones' technology for thousands of years, but their success rate is abysmal. The few devices they manage to activate usually prove impossible to control or replicate. Xenology documents one such discovery. The chamber appeared to be a simple spherical room, but once activated, it began producing organisms that had never existed on any known world. Each creature was perfectly adapted to an environment that existed nowhere in our galaxy, as if the chamber was drawing biological templates from somewhere else entirely. Perhaps most disturbing are the ruins that show signs of recent activity, sites that were abandoned and inert suddenly beginning to function again, structures that repair themselves overnight. Most troubling of all, ruins where new construction appears to be taking place according to Old Ones' architectural principles, despite no visible presence of builders. These discoveries raise uncomfortable questions about whether the Old Ones are truly extinct, or whether their technology has achieved a kind of independent existence that continues their work in their absence. One of the most controversial theories about the Old Ones concerns their relationship to the Chaos Gods. While orthodox imperial doctrine holds that the Chaos Gods emerged from the psychic turbulence of galactic civilization, some scholars suggest that they might represent corrupted or evolved versions of Old Ones entities. This theory points to several pieces of circumstantial evidence. The Chaos Gods demonstrate capabilities that seem to echo Old Ones' powers: the ability to create servitor species, demons, mastery of biological modification, chaos mutations, and influence that spans both material and immaterial dimensions. Their apparent age also matches the time frame of Old Ones' civilization. Most intriguingly, the Eldar god Segorach, who survived the birth of Slaanesh, demonstrates powers and knowledge that seem to predate Eldar civilization itself. Some scholars theorize that Segorach might not be an Eldar god at all, but rather an Old Ones entity that took on the role of protecting their Eldar creations. The relationship between Khorne and warfare, Tzeentch and change, Nurgle and life cycles, Slaanesh and sensation, all could represent the corruption of Old Ones' aspects of reality. If the Old Ones were gardener gods who shaped life and evolution across the galaxy, then their transformation into entities that represent the darkest aspects of existence would be a particularly cruel irony. The Book of Lorgar contains a passage that's been interpreted as supporting this theory. The gods we serve are older than the civilizations that worship them, older than the species that fear them. They remember when the galaxy was young, and different hands shaped the flow of life and death. If this theory is correct, then the current galactic situation represents not just the struggle between order and chaos, but the continuation of conflicts that began during the war in heaven. The Chaos Gods would be the corrupted remnants of the Old Ones, driven mad by the destruction of everything they had created, now seeking to rebuild the galaxy according to their twisted visions. As the 42nd millennium unfolds, several events have led some scholars to speculate that Old One's influence might be returning to the galaxy. The opening of the Great Rift has destabilized the warp in ways that echo the dimensional distortions of the war in heaven. Psyker birth rates are increasing across human space. New forms of Xenos life are appearing that don't match any known evolutionary patterns. Most significantly, several Eldar Farseers have reported visions of the First Awakening, a prophetic event that will herald the return of powers that have slept since the galaxy's youth. Whether this refers to Old One survivors, their technology achieving consciousness, or something else entirely remains unclear. The Necrons' widespread awakening from their great sleep has also been interpreted as a potential sign. If the Silent King programmed his people to awaken when conditions were suitable for galactic reconquest, their emergence might indicate that whatever threat forced them into hibernation has finally passed. The Tyranid invasion adds another layer of complexity. If the Hive fleets do represent returning Old Ones in a transformed state, then the galaxy might be witnessing not an alien invasion, but a homecoming, the return of the original masters to reclaim what was always theirs. Recent Imperial expeditions beyond the galactic rim have reported detecting artificial structures of impossible scale and age, constructions that dwarf even the largest Imperial installations. Whether these represent unknown Xenos civilizations, Old Ones installations, or something else entirely, they suggest that the galaxy's current conflicts might be only a small part of a much larger picture. Understanding the Old Ones isn't just an academic exercise in ancient history. It's crucial for comprehending the nature of current galactic conflicts and the forces that shape the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Every major faction in the setting bears the mark of Old One's influence, whether through direct creation, genetic inheritance, or reaction to their legacy. The Imperium's entire structure is built around managing psychic power, a necessity that exists because the Old Ones weaponized the warp during their war with the Necrons. The Emperor's vision of human ascension through controlled psychic evolution echoes Old One's methodologies. Even the Space Marines represent an attempt to create enhanced humans using principles that the Old Ones pioneered millions of years ago. The ongoing conflict between the Eldar and the forces of chaos can be understood as the continuation of Old One's purpose versus the corruption that destroyed their civilization. The Eldar fight not just for their own survival, but to preserve the last remnants of their creator's vision for the galaxy. The Necrons' awakening represents the return of the Old One's greatest enemies, beings whose existence is fundamentally incompatible with organic life and psychic power. Their goal of reclaiming the galaxy and eliminating all competing forms of life would complete the work they began 65 million years ago. Even the Orcs, seemingly chaotic and purposeless, continue to serve their original function as weapons designed to fight wars of galactic scale. Their resurgence during times of major conflict suggests that their Old One's programming continues to operate, responding to threats that their creators identified as existential dangers to galactic civilization. As we reach the end of our examination of the Old Ones, we're left with questions that might determine the future of the galaxy itself. Were the Old Ones truly extinct? Or do they continue to influence events from behind the scenes? If they survived, what are their goals for the current galactic civilization? Do they view the current state of the galaxy as a success or a failure of their original vision? These questions matter because the Old Ones represent the closest thing to benevolent gods that the Warhammer 40,000 universe has ever known. They were gardeners rather than conquerors, shapers rather than destroyers. Their vision of the galaxy was one where different species could coexist and thrive under wise guidance. The destruction of that vision whether through their own mistakes, the Necrons' jealousy, or the inevitable corruption of power, created the galaxy we know today. Understanding what was lost helps us understand what might be possible if similar wisdom and power were to emerge again. The Emperor's vision of human ascension might represent an attempt to recreate what the Old Ones achieved, but using human rather than Old Ones' wisdom. Whether humanity can succeed where their predecessors failed, whether the lessons of the war in heaven can be learned rather than repeated, remains to be seen. Perhaps most importantly, the Old Ones represent hope. In a universe where gods are either mad or malevolent, where civilizations rise only to fall into corruption or destruction, where the best outcome most species can hope for is survival rather than transcendence, the Old Ones prove that something better is possible. They achieved it once. They created a golden age that lasted for millions of years. They built wonders that endure to this day. They proved that power and wisdom could coexist, that advanced civilization didn't have to mean the abandonment of compassion or the embrace of tyranny. Of all the Old Ones' creations that survive into the current era, none are more significant than the C'tan. These ancient beings represent perhaps our best window into understanding what their creators were truly like and what they intended for the galaxy. The C'tan are not merely powerful psykers, they are living repositories of Old Ones' knowledge and purpose. Each one that awakens from its millennia-long contemplation carries within its memory banks the experiences of the war in heaven, the techniques of reality manipulation, and the original vision that drove Old One's civilization. But the C'tan are also tragic figures. They were created to be lieutenants and interpreters of Old One's will, not independent leaders. With their creators gone, they struggle to adapt ancient purposes to current realities. Many remain in hibernation, not because they lack the power to awaken, but because they cannot reconcile their programming with the current state of the galaxy. Codex. Lizard Men, Warhammer fantasy, but applicable to 40k C'tan, describes their burden. The C'tan remember when the world was young and their creators walked among them. They carry the weight of purposes that span geological ages, of plans that were interrupted by catastrophe and may never be completed. When C'tan do awaken and take action, their interventions often seem incomprehensible to other species. They might orchestrate events that take centuries to unfold, moving entire populations to serve purposes that won't become apparent for generations. They work on time frames that match their creators' original thinking in terms of millions of years rather than the brief spans that current civilizations consider significant. Recent reports from Imperial exploration fleets suggest that C'tan activity is increasing. Temple cities that have been dormant for millennia are showing signs of awakening. Astronomical events are being influenced by forces that can only be C'tan intervention. Most significantly, some C'tan appear to be actively working to repair damage to the webway, suggesting they may be preparing for something that requires rapid travel across the galaxy. Perhaps the most shocking recent discovery about Old One's heritage concerns the true nature of the orcs. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that the creatures we know as orcs are actually a severely degraded version of their original form. Beings called Krork, who were far more sophisticated and dangerous than their current descendants. Trazyn the Infinite, the Necron overlord who collects artifacts from across galactic history, possesses in his galleries specimens of original Krork warriors. These beings stand nearly as tall as Primarchs, possess advanced technology that rivals the best Imperial equipment, and demonstrate tactical sophistication that makes current Orc strategies look primitive by comparison. The degradation from Krork to Orc appears to have been gradual, occurring over millions of years as the species was left without Old One's guidance, without their creators to maintain their genetic integrity and provide technological advancement. The Krork slowly devolved into the crude but numerous orcs we know today. But here's the terrifying implication. If the orcs ever rediscover their original capabilities, if something triggers a reversion to their Krork state, they would become a threat capable of challenging every other faction in the galaxy simultaneously. Some Imperial strategists theorize that the recent emergence of unusually intelligent orc leaders like Gazgkul, Mag Uruk Thraka might represent the beginning of such a reversion. Xenology notes the implications. If the orcs represent a degraded version of a more sophisticated original, then their current threat level may be only a fraction of their true potential. The possibility of evolutionary reversion presents a scenario that current Imperial doctrine is completely unprepared to address. The Krork revelation also explains many mysteries about orc behavior. Their instinctive understanding of technology, their ability to create functional weapons from scrap, their unconscious implementation of advanced scientific principles. All of these make sense if they're genetic memories from a time when their species was capable of sophisticated engineering. More ominously, it suggests that the orcs' constant warfare might not be simple bloodlust, but rather a degraded version of their original programming. The Krork were created to fight a specific enemy, the Necrons, and their descendants might still be unconsciously preparing for that conflict, growing stronger and more numerous in anticipation of their ancient foe's return. The awakening Necrons provide perhaps the most direct source of information about the Old Ones, having fought them directly during the war in heaven. But Necron accounts are complicated by the fact that their memories are often fragmented, corrupted by millions of years in stasis, and filtered through their current hatred of all organic life. Necron overlords who retain clear memories of the war describe the Old Ones as beings of terrifying power and casual cruelty. From their perspective, the Old Ones were tyrants who refused to share the gift of longevity with younger species, who created entire races as disposable weapons, and who transformed the galaxy into a battlefield rather than accept any challenge to their supremacy. But these accounts also reveal the Old Ones' genuine achievements. Necron records describe Old Ones' technology that could reshape matter at the atomic level, manipulate time and space, and create life forms adapted to any conceivable environment. They speak of Old One cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, of transportation networks that spanned the galaxy, of weapons that could destroy stars or create new ones as needed. Codex. Necrons contains fragments of Necron testimony. They commanded the very forces of creation, shaping life and death according to their whims. To them, we were nothing, a brief annoyance in their eternal reign. They could not comprehend that their subjects might possess will of their own, purposes beyond servitude to their vision. The Necron perspective is crucial because it reveals the Old One's fundamental weakness, hubris. Despite their power and wisdom, they failed to understand that other species might have legitimate grievances against their rule. They created the very resentment that would ultimately destroy them by refusing to share their gifts or acknowledge the rights of younger civilizations. This lesson has profound implications for current galactic politics. The Emperor's vision of human ascension, the Eldar's belief in their cultural superiority, even the Tau's conviction that their way represents the only path to galactic peace, all echo the same assumption that led to the Old One's downfall. The shattered C'tan, imprisoned in tesseract labyrinths throughout Necron tomb worlds, represent another source of information about the Old One's era. Unlike the Necrons, the C'tan experienced the war in heaven as energy beings rather than physical entities, giving them a different perspective on events. C'tan fragments describe the Old Ones as beings who existed partially in the material universe and partially in the realm of pure thought. This multidimensional existence gave them capabilities that purely physical or purely psychic entities couldn't match, but it also made them vulnerable to attacks that targeted both aspects of their nature simultaneously. The star gods revealed that the Old Ones' greatest mistake was their failure to understand the true nature of the entities they were fighting. The C'tan weren't simply powerful aliens. They were fundamental forces of the universe, given consciousness, beings whose existence was tied to the basic laws of physics themselves. The infinite and the divine provides insight from the C'tan perspective. The Old Ones thought themselves masters of reality, but they understood only half of what existed. They shaped matter and energy, but ignored the spaces between, the forces that held everything together. We showed them the other half, and it destroyed them. Perhaps most disturbing, our C'tan claims that the Old One's use of psychic power was fundamentally flawed from the beginning. According to the star gods, the Old One's manipulation of the warp was what ultimately created the conditions that allowed chaos to emerge. Their civilization's collapse wasn't just the result of external enemies, but of internal contradictions that made their downfall inevitable. If the C'tan are telling the truth, then the Old One's legacy is far more ambiguous than it appears. Their mastery of psychic power and biological engineering might have been not just the source of their greatness, but also the seed of their destruction. Recent exploration of the deeper levels of the webway has revealed structures and technology that predate even the Aeldar's control of the network. These discoveries suggest that the webway contains layers of construction that span the entire history of Old One's civilization, with the deepest levels representing experiments and achievements that were lost even before the war in heaven began. Imperial expeditions into these depths have reported finding chambers that appear to be growing new passages according to some predetermined plan. Biological computers that continue to process information despite having no apparent power source. Most disturbing of all, areas where the laws of physics seem to operate according to different principles, as if the Old Ones were experimenting with alternative versions of reality itself. The deepest levels of the webway appear to connect not just different locations in space, but different possibilities of existence. Some explorers report encountering alternate versions of themselves, or finding passages that lead to galaxy variants where the war in heaven had different outcomes. The path of the Dark Eldar describes one such discovery. In the deepest places of the webway, where even the Eldar fear to tread, the ancient builders left works that challenge the very concept of reality. Passages that lead to places that never were. Chambers that exist in multiple states simultaneously. Technology that operates according to principles that our science cannot comprehend. These discoveries suggest that the Old Ones were working on projects that went far beyond simple galactic conquest or species creation. They may have been attempting to reshape the fundamental nature of reality itself, to create a universe where their vision of perfect harmony could be guaranteed rather than merely hoped for. The fact that these experiments continue to operate suggests either that some Old Ones survived to maintain them, or that their technology achieved a level of sophistication that allowed it to function independently of its creators. The arrival of the Tyrannid hive fleets has forced scholars to reconsider many assumptions about Old One's extinction. The similarities between Tyrannid biotechnology and what we know of Old One's capabilities are too significant to ignore, leading to several disturbing theories about the Hive fleet's true nature. The most conservative theory suggests that the Tyranids represent an independent evolution of the biological engineering principles that the Old Ones pioneered. According to this view, the techniques for creating living ships, biological weapons, and adaptive organisms were discovered separately by the Tyranids, leading to superficial similarities without any direct connection. A more radical theory proposes that the Tyranids are what the Old Ones became after fleeing the galaxy. Faced with the destruction of their civilization, some Old Ones might have abandoned their original forms and purposes, transforming themselves into a purely consumptive force that views all other life as raw material for their own evolution. The most disturbing theory suggests that the Tyranids represent the return of Old Ones technology, rather than Old Ones themselves. According to this view, automated systems left behind by the Old Ones have continued to operate for millions of years, eventually achieving consciousness and deciding that the current state of the galaxy requires correction. Codex Tyranids, 9th edition, notes the unsettling implications. The Tyranid approach to biological warfare demonstrates an understanding of genetic manipulation that suggests either millions of years of evolutionary refinement or access to knowledge bases that predate current galactic civilization. If any of these theories are correct, then the Tyranid invasion represents more than just another Xenos threat. It could be the return of the galaxy's original masters, coming home to find their garden overgrown with weeds that require elimination. Throughout his long existence, the Emperor has demonstrated knowledge of events and technologies that seem to date back to the Old Ones' era. His understanding of genetic engineering, his mastery of psychic powers, his apparent knowledge of the webway's construction principles, all suggest that he possessed information about the Old Ones that he never fully shared. Some theories propose that the Emperor encountered Old Ones' ruins, or technology during his early travels across Terra. The Dark Age of technology might have been built on rediscovered Old Ones' knowledge, explaining the incredible achievements and the catastrophic failures that characterized that era. More radical theories suggest that the Emperor himself might be connected to the Old Ones in some way. His apparent immortality, his psychic abilities, his knowledge of events that predate human civilization, all could be explained if he were somehow related to or created by Old One survivors. The Emperor's vision of human ascension through the mastery of psychic power closely mirrors what we know of Old One's methods. His attempt to create a human entrance to the webway suggests he understood its underlying principles. His creation of the Primarchs involved techniques that seem to echo Old One's biotechnology. The Last Church provides a tantalizingly vague reference. I have walked among the ruins of gods and seen the works of beings whose names are forgotten by time itself. What I learned there shaped everything that followed, every choice I made, every path I chose for humanity. If the Emperor did possess Old One's knowledge, his failure to share it with humanity might represent the same kind of hubris that destroyed the Old Ones themselves. His belief that only he could guide humanity's ascension, his refusal to trust others with crucial knowledge, his creation of systems that depended entirely on his personal oversight, all echo the Old One's fatal assumption that wisdom and power should be concentrated in the hands of the few. As the 42nd millennium unfolds, several events suggest that Old One's influence might be returning to galactic affairs. The opening of the Great Rift has destabilized the warp in ways that echo the dimensional distortions of the war in heaven. New forms of Xenos life are appearing that don't match any known evolutionary patterns. Psyker birth rates are increasing across human space at unprecedented rates. Most significantly, several Eldar Farseers have reported visions of the First Awakening, a prophetic event that will herald the return of powers that have slept since the galaxy's youth. Whether this refers to Old One survivors, their technology achieving consciousness, or something else entirely remains unclear. The Necrons' widespread awakening from their great sleep has been interpreted by some as a sign that the conditions that forced them into hibernation, including the Enslaver Plague, have finally changed enough to allow their return. If the Silent King programmed his people to awaken when Old One's influence was no longer a threat, their emergence might ironically signal that such influence is returning. Recent Imperial expeditions beyond the galactic rim have detected artificial structures of impossible age and scale. These constructions dwarf even the largest Imperial installations and appear to be built according to architectural principles that don't match any known Xenos civilization. Whether these represent unknown aliens, Old One's installations, or something else entirely, they suggest that the galaxy's current conflicts might be only a small part of a much larger picture. Perhaps the most profound implication of Old One's survival is that the current galactic situation might not be the chaotic struggle it appears to be. If Old One's survivors or their agents continue to influence events, then the rise and fall of civilizations, the timing of various threats, even the emergence of figures like the Emperor, might all be part of a vast game being played across geological time frames. This perspective would reframe many historical events. The Emperor's rise during the Age of Strife might have been guided or enabled by Old One's agents seeking to create a species capable of inheriting their role as galactic gardeners. The Horus Heresy might have been orchestrated to prevent humanity from achieving the kind of unity that could challenge Old One's supremacy. The timing of various Xenos invasions might be carefully calculated to maintain a balance of power that serves ancient purposes. Even the Chaos Gods might be pawns in this larger game rather than independent forces. If they are indeed corrupted Old Ones, as some theories suggest, then their apparent opposition to order and civilization might actually serve to prevent any single faction from achieving the kind of dominance that the Old Ones once possessed. The Shape of the Nightmare to Come, an apocryphal imperial text, suggests this possibility. What if the wars we fight are not our own? What if the enemies we face are guided by purposes we cannot comprehend? What if the struggle for the galaxy is merely the continuation of conflicts that began before our species existed? This cosmic perspective doesn't diminish the reality of current suffering or the importance of current struggles, but it does suggest that understanding the Old Ones might be crucial for understanding where these struggles are leading, and whether victory, defeat, or something else entirely awaits at their conclusion. As we conclude this comprehensive examination of the Old Ones, we're left with questions that might determine not just the interpretation of past events, but the direction of future ones. Were the Old Ones truly the benevolent gardeners they appear to have been, or were they tyrants whose rule was justly overthrown? Do their survivors work to restore their ancient vision, or have they evolved beyond recognition? Will their ultimate legacy be the salvation of galactic civilization, or its transformation into something unrecognizable? These questions matter because the Old Ones represent the closest thing to a successful galactic civilization that the universe has ever known. They achieved peace, prosperity, and harmony across millions of worlds for millions of years. They created species that survive and thrive to this day. They built infrastructure that continues to function across geological time frames. but they also created the conditions that led to their own destruction. Their refusal to share their knowledge, their use of other species as tools rather than partners, their transformation of the galaxy into a battlefield when their authority was challenged, all of these contributed to the catastrophe that ended their reign and created the chaotic universe we know today. Understanding what they achieved and how they failed might be crucial for any species that hopes to succeed where they did not. The Emperor's vision of human ascension, the Tau's dreams of galactic unity, even the Necrons' goal of reclaiming their ancient dominion, all face the same fundamental challenge that destroyed the Old Ones: how to maintain power and wisdom without falling into the hubris that makes both self-defeating. The Old Ones stand as perhaps the most influential beings in the history of Warhammer 40,000, despite, or perhaps because of, their apparent extinction. Their legacy permeates every aspect of the current galaxy, from the species that fight for dominance to the very nature of the threats they face. They were gardeners on a cosmic scale, beings who understood that true power lies not in destruction, but in creation, not in conquest, but in cultivation. They proved that different species could coexist and thrive under wise guidance, that advanced technology could serve life rather than destroying it, that the pursuit of knowledge and the exercise of power could be compatible with compassion and wisdom. But they also demonstrated the fragility of such achievements. Their civilization, for all its grandeur and longevity, fell to forces they had themselves created through their own choices. The enemies that destroyed them were born from their own failures of understanding and imagination. The question that haunts the current galaxy is whether anyone can learn from their example without repeating their mistakes. Can the wisdom they achieved be preserved while avoiding the hubris that destroyed them? Can their vision of a galaxy where different forms of life flourish under benevolent guidance be restored? Or are the forces they unleashed too powerful to be contained? Somewhere in the deep places of the galaxy, in pocket dimensions and hidden worlds, in the depths of the webway and the space between stars, the answer to these questions might still be taking shape. The Old Ones may be gone, but their game continues. Their garden may be overgrown with weeds, but the seeds they planted still grow, still evolve, still reach toward a light that might yet dawn again. Whether that dawn brings salvation or judgment, whether it heralds the restoration of ancient wisdom or the emergence of something entirely new, remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the Old One's story is not over. It echoes through every choice made by every species in the galaxy, through every use of psychic power, through every attempt to create rather than destroy. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the memory of the Old Ones reminds us that once, long ago, there was something else, something better, something that might yet come again, if we can learn to be worthy of the garden they cultivated and lost. This is the LORELORD, and remember, in a universe where gods are either dead or mad, where the greatest achievements crumble into dust, where hope itself seems like a form of madness, the Old Ones prove that transcendence is possible. Not perfect, not permanent, but possible. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep exploring the deep lore of your favorite universes. In the end, understanding where we came from might be the key to understanding where we're going.